afternoon, and we want to welcome you to another one of our Blanco oral history interviews. We're sitting here today on a nice old porch of a home that was built in 1917, and I'm here today to have the privilege to interview Tony Petri. Tony is a longtime employee of the Blanco Independent School District, and I like to refer to him as the man who has all the keys for the school. My name is Martha Hurden, and I'm looking forward to speaking with Tony today because he's got a vast amount of history. He's got a very strong connection to Blanco, and also Tony has something very unique that not all of us get a chance to hear about, especially today. Tony is a veteran of the Vietnam War, so we're going to talk about a little bit of everything today and try not to make Tony too nervous.
I'll try.
Tony, now when I call you Tony, are you Tony Petri or is there a full complete name?
Anthony Lee.
Anthony Lee Petri. What a name of distinction.
But as long as I can remember, it's been Tony.
It's been Tony. And how many family members do you have, brothers and sisters?
One sister who was the oldest, and then there were 5 boys. My sister helped raise us, I think. My poor mama, you know, she was a premature baby. She was born in 1922, and the doctor gave up on her, and somehow the nurse, and she was born at home, of course, in that time, and somehow God had a plan for her because she survived and ended up having 6 kids. So
6 children.
and she's still alive today, so I guess.
And how old is your mother right now?
She's 90.
90?
Well, she'll be 90 in January.
My goodness.
So I guess she's doing something right.
So who would you say you take after, your mother or your father?
Probably both. I mean, my dad instilled in me a work ethic. My dad worked 2 jobs as long as I knew him. You know, he never finished school, but we never did without his kids. I mean, we always had a place to lay our hands and food to eat. My dad made sure of it. He worked hard his whole life. So I think that part of him I got definitely. I mean, because I feel a strong responsibility to take care of my family.
Tony, what in your with your siblings, what rank do you fall in? The oldest, the youngest, the middle?
Dead center practically.
Dead center.
I've got 2 brothers and a sister above me and 2 brothers below me.
You and I were talking a little bit about where you grew up at, and come to find out, you've got a little bit of a Blanco connection with your grandparents, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Could you tell me about that?
My great-great-grandfather came from Germany, Johann Petri.
Johann Petri.
And they came in Indianola and settled in New Braunfels, and was in New Braunfels. This was in the 1840s. And settled in New Braunfels for a year and a half, and made their way to the Blanco area. And the government at that time was granting immigrants land, and they got 300 acres to settle, and they built a 2-story stone house out of the stone off the ground that still stands today.
And where's that house at?
It's in Albert.
In Albert, Texas.
Yes, ma'am. It's still there. And there's people still living in it to this day. So it all started there, and he had a son that fathered 12 kids. 12 children. And my grandfather was one of those 12. My grandfather was born in 1892 on that farm, and my grandfather lived on that farm, got married, had his kids on that farm until they lost it in the Depression, couldn't pay the taxes, and moved to Fredericksburg. My dad didn't finish school, and he started working in Fredericksburg, and he eventually moved to San Antonio, where he met my mother. She's Polish, from Stockdale. So that was quite a combination, a German and a Polish.
That's a big combination.
Yeah. But so I was raised in San Antonio, but I have family still out here today, and we used to come up to Blanco area all the time when I was a kid.
What do you recall about how Blanco looked during that time when you were coming up in those earlier days, how it looked? What you thought about it?
Well, I was young, and all I cared about was going to the river and going fishing more than anything. We did a lot of that, but it just seems so much busier, you know.
Now?
It seems so quaint and isolated in ways, but it's just like everywhere else, you know. Time moves on, and more people start coming, and it's still a nice place. It's still a good place to raise a family.
Did you think you'd find your way up here to raise your family?
Well, when I got out of the service in 1971, my brother and I bought the land that I live on now in 1974 with the idea that someday we would build on it. We were pretty naive, not realizing what it would take to build a home financially or anything else. And there was quite a few things happening in my life after that, but I finally got around to building the home that I live in now in 1995. So it was 20 years before I finally started building a house.
Somebody told me yesterday, you correct me if I'm wrong, that you built that house entirely yourself.
I did. It took me about 3 years.
From top to bottom?
Top to bottom. From the concrete footings and piers to hanging the doors and all the trim work. I did it all. One of my older brothers is a licensed electrician. He has a business in Austin. He designed the wiring and the electrical plan for me. I did all the work. I pulled all the wire, set the panels. I even wired it all in with his direction. Yeah, I mean everything from start to finish, I did it myself.
Tony, did you have any particular hopes and dreams of what you wanted to do after you got out of high school?
No, I didn't. I think I was a typical teenager that I'm going through that with my daughters right now. You know, one of them's in college, and she changes her mind frequently about, well, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. But I didn't. I really didn't have an idea. When I graduated from high school, I got a job at McDonough Brothers, which was a gravel. It's sitting where Fiesta, Texas is, on I-10 in San Antonio.
Right.
That gravel pit there that is now Fiesta, Texas, used to be McDonough Brothers, and they manufactured formed up I-beams for highway bridges, and I poured concrete, that kind of stuff, tied rebar. And I was there almost a year when I got my draft notice. And I thought, yeah, you know, I'll just go in the Army and maybe I'll figure out what I want to do.
Well, you know, Tony, when I first got to talking to you about veteran interviews, and you just casually mentioned to me that you were a veteran, my first response was, no, you're not. You're too young. And you certainly do look young. So let me ask you, tell me about being in that time period and having to register for the draft. What were your feelings about that?
Well, they had the lottery in those days, and my number was 68.
Yeah.
So I had a feeling I was going to be called, but I was prepared. I mean, I really, again, I didn't have any specific goals in mind yet, and I was not against traveling and seeing the world, even if it meant doing it in the military. So when I got my draft notice, I willingly went down there and said, let's go, let's do it.
And what branch of the service?
It was Army.
It was the Army. Do you recall your feelings when that letter came in the mail?
A little apprehension, but a little bit of excitement too, to be honest.
How did your mother react?
Oh, she'd already had two of my older brothers had already served and been in, one in the Navy and one in the Army.
And both in Vietnam?
Yes, my oldest brother in the Navy was on a ship, so he wasn't on shore. He was offshore, but he was there. But the brother right next to me was in the 101st Airborne, and he was in a combat unit, and he had some rough times.
So all three of you chose different areas of the service to be involved in?
Pretty much. I mean, I didn't have a lot of choice because I was drafted.
Tell me what happened. Give us a general description of what it's like when you got to go and report the first day to boot camp.
I took basic training in Fort Lewis, Washington.
Not in San Antonio?
No. And this is near Seattle, Tacoma, up there. And it was in early March. And here I am, a boy from Texas, and it's warm. So I had no coat.
Weren't ready for the weather.
No. And we land over there, and it's rainy, sleety.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and I'm just naive a bit. But it didn't take the Army long to round you up, ship you up. The first thing to do is get your uniforms and fit you and all of that. So, and then we were out doing maneuvers in no time. I mean, you were in formation, you were marching, and that's just the way it was. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question. Do you recall your serial number?
No, I don't.
I had a veteran I interviewed recently, and he's probably close to about 90 years old, and he could rattle off that serial number.
That's amazing.
But he also talked about how it had been drilled into his head. Tony, did you know you were headed to Vietnam?
No, but in those days you had a pretty good feeling because I don't know if it was all, but the vast majority of the draftees, that's where they went. You know, that's why you were drafted, was to go fight over there.
Can you recall the atmosphere of the country a little bit during that time, and if that had any impact on you and your opinion of what you were getting ready to do?
When you're born and raised in America, and again, my family was close-knit. We didn't have a lot, but we were close. And I went over there and I saw people living in cardboard shacks. No restroom facilities. I mean, you could walk down in formation. You'd be in patrol, walk down the road, and you'd see people just on the side of the road doing their private business. You know, they don't, and that was common. And I thought, man, America's a great place.
Right.
But you don't realize that until you go somewhere else and see.
And you see it firsthand.
Yeah. Everybody was so poor, just had nothing.
Could you see, in addition to that, could you feel the impact of how they were being oppressed and the reason for our country to be there and to fight, to help them?
I could, after I was there for a while. But the sad part is, to me, it was almost the average person that worked the rice fields and the day-to-day life just to live, to sustain yourself. I don't think they cared what government governed them, because their life didn't change.
It stayed the same.
It didn't matter if it was the Democratic South or the Communist North. I mean, their life wouldn't change at all. Now, theoretically, the democracy movement in the South promised a better future, but who's to say if that would have happened if the South would have stood the way South Korea has? I don't know, but that's that was my impression of going from villages to villages. The people, they just went about their business and did what they had to do to survive.
In addition to seeing the country like that and the people suffering, what was one of your other shocks while you were there? What did you see that you thought was something that stayed with you?
Well, people dying. I mean, you don't ever forget that.
No, you don't.
And that was all, of course, new to me. You know, I'm just a country boy that was there.
Were you instructed, did anybody tell you, now this is how you handle it, or just deal with it?
No, not really. You just dealt with it. You know, you had your friends, and we supported each other. Fortunately, the outfit I was in, there were only a few casualties.
Do you remember each one of them?
Yeah.
It stayed with you, hadn't it?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while you think back, sure. You also think back of the ones that came home with you, and you wonder how they are, because there was a couple of guys that were close to me that got into drugs pretty heavily, just to cope, you know, with the situation.
While they were there?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was readily available, you know, you could, opium, I mean, the locals did opium as part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana, you know, the whole thing. So you wonder about some of those guys and how, if they were able to get their life in order after they got home. You know, they did make it through, but what happened to them after that, it's hard to say.
I would gather it's a true statement to say, from the way you're talking, that you saw men that you knew were going to be forever changed, including yourself.
No doubt about it. There's no doubt about that, yeah. I mean, it definitely gives you a different perspective on life. Yeah.
Tell me how that perspective is. Can you describe it? It giving you a different perspective?
Well, for me, I realized how precious life is, just life in general. And again, like I said before, about realizing how blessed we are in this country, and to take that for granted is a shame. Yeah.
It's a silly question, and I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it. Were you scared?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was in a dog unit, and I had a German Shepherd, and everybody in my squad had a dog, and we would go out on patrol, and we worked at night.
Mm-hmm.
And our job was to scout the area, because there was a lot of issues with snipers.
Right.
So the dogs were trained to pick up the scent of the enemy. If our dog picked something up, we would radio it in, they'd bring in the helicopters, and they would just strafe the whole area. And so
well,
yeah, I mean, working at night, walking around, you had to be afraid to stay alive, I think.
that was one of the other things that I found out about you yesterday, in talking to my extra source, who just happened to be your mother. She mentioned to me that you worked with the dogs.
Yeah.
And I thought that was worth doing a little bit of research on the internet. And just a couple of things that came up, and I want to read you a couple of things, and I want to see if you relate to any of them. What the dogs did. The thing we weren't prepared for and we weren't trained for in Vietnam were mines and booby traps. But on one occasion I was with Caesar, Caesar being the name of the dog. And we actually went into an area where we had contact with the enemy and we were tracking them. And the dog stopped and walked back and just sat on my foot. It was only after that I found out there were 4 mines in front of me, plus a 500-pound unexploded bomb. The dog actually saved my life and saved the life of all those around me. We spent most of our time when we went out on contacts actually flying. And the dogs generally loved riding in the helicopter because it was cooler in the helicopter than on ground. How does that relate to what you did?
Similar. We were trucked out most of the time. We did go in helicopters, but more often we were in trucks. So there would be a dozen of us in this 2.5-ton transport truck. It's open in the back. We had to muzzle our dogs so they wouldn't, because they would like to exert dominance and fight. But yeah, I mean that happened. I mean I was there when a booby trap went off and a grenade killed one of the guys that I was referring to earlier. Yeah, so I mean that was always there. I mean the possibility was always there. That's just the way it was.
There was another dog that was talked about. His name was Nemo, and they talked about that there's a veteran coming off the airplane. He walks down the ramp and he has a limp, and he's got an eye missing, and the scar from his eye missing runs all the way down his mouth. But there's something different about this veteran. He's a dog. And Nemo was kept after he came home at Lackland Air Force Base until he died, and has been really truly considered one of the famous dogs that worked there. And I gather you became quite attached to your dog.
Oh yeah.
What was your dog's name?
His name was Brutus.
Brutus?
Yeah. And he was one of the bigger dogs. He was about 110 pounds. He was, they were all German Shepherds. Good sized dog. But you did become so attached because you depended on the dog. I mean, nobody messed with you. Not even your own officers or
Really?
NCOs, because you had that dog with you all the time, so nobody would get too close. You know, they would get close enough to talk, maybe give orders or directions or whatever you were going to next, but nobody gave you any trouble because they couldn't get close enough to bother you because your dog was always
right there.
And the dog would not let anyone get close. You know?
Really?
And the military had invested so much money and time and training on these dogs that they were very valuable, so everybody left it alone.
Do you remember what happened to your dog?
No, I don't. Normal procedure was when I left country, they would put my dog in a pen, usually for a month, 6 weeks, to get him used to know the fact that I'm not coming back. And then they would start, the next guy that was going to have him for the next year, go up and start feeding him and talking to him and trying to, befriend him. And then eventually he would take him out and he would have that dog for his tour.
There was another soldier here that talked about leaving his dog.
It was tough.
He said he went out to the cage and the dog always knew that he was ready to be fed, so that he walked up and the dog had his pail in his mouth. And the man said, "Now look, this is the way it is. I'm leaving, but you have to stay here. I don't make the rules, they do. But I'm always going to think about you, and I want you to take care of yourself." He turned around, and he heard the dog pail, his food pail, hit the ground. He turned back around to look and to see the dog laying with his head on the ground. And he said he felt like 1,000 pounds had dropped out of his chest, having to walk away from that animal.
Yeah.
That had saved his life so many times.
We even asked if there was a way where we could buy the dog and bring him home.
And of course, no.
But they said no, they had too much invested in him. They needed him. But yeah, it was hard. I mean,
Tony, how fast would you say, as you look back on it now, that you could see a young troop arriving in Vietnam? How fast would you see changes occurring now?
Fairly quickly. When I landed in country, I was in Saigon, that's where you flew in, and then they trucked us up to Cam Ranh Bay, which is more of a processing center. And then you got shipped out to the bush area, to wherever you were going, to the villages, etc. So yeah, it didn't take long.
Did you correspond with your brothers?
I did. No, more so with my girlfriend at the time.
Good.
I wrote letters to her and my parents. But that didn't last either. She quit writing after about 6 months.
But Mama never quit.
Mama never quit. That's right.
Well, that was something that your mom talked to me yesterday about also, about the fact of the worry, the fear, and how that she wrote letters and waited for the letter to come back, and how she prayed so hard that all 3 of her sons would come back home. And they did.
And they did. Her prayers were answered.
Now, of the 3 of you that served, how have each of you seemed to have handled being there mentally? Have you all been about the same, or has one been affected more than
I think my oldest brother that was in the Navy and myself have adapted pretty well. I mean, I think we need normal lives. The brother just over me, he had a little more difficult time, but he also had a more difficult assignment. He saw a lot of things that I didn't, and my older brother didn't. He was part of the Tet Offensive in '68, which was pretty rough. But he's always. David's funny because growing up, he was always kind of the black sheep anyway. You know, he was a loner. He would get in trouble in high school. The rest of us were angels, you know.
Angels.
Yeah.
Angels.
But David, when he got back, he bought a motorcycle. He just traveled. He even went to Pakistan and lived in Pakistan for about 6 months. He just couldn't find himself and what he was supposed to do and go.
Did you talk at all about this?
Yeah. No, not so much about the war, just more about life and what we wanted to do with ourselves.
Do you think that he has settled more now as he ages?
He eventually did. He's got 2 daughters. He got married and got 2 daughters. He is divorced, but he did. Everything came to it. It was just a lot later than the rest of us.
Can you tell me if you can recall what it was like coming home, arriving back on American soil?
Well, it was exhilarating, just a sense of relief, excitement. I mean, I'm thinking, and you were talking about what do you want to do with the rest of your life.
Right.
I mean, I had just all kinds of things flashing through my head. I was back home in the greatest country in the world, and I could do whatever I wanted to do, and I had all kinds of ideas. I mean, I didn't do any of them. I went different directions, but you know, you just felt like when you go through something like that, and I'm sure it's the same with the guys in Iraq and Afghanistan today, that if you go through something like that and make it back, you feel like you can accomplish anything. You know, you really do. If I can make it through that, I can do anything.
But did you hear about how, you know, we've heard stories. I've read in the paper that how some veterans from Vietnam were treated terribly. They were spit on. Some veterans have tossed their medals away. You know, they were treated horribly when they arrived back here in the country.
I can honestly say that didn't happen to me.
Well, thank goodness.
My family, relatives, everybody just welcomed me with open arms. But when I mentioned to you, I went to college on the GI Bill, and people respected me. I didn't encounter that. I don't know if that was San Antonio was different. Maybe if you go to some of the places like San Francisco, Berkeley, or you know, where it was a little more radical, but San Antonio, in my experience, treated me well.
Have you seen the Vietnam Wall?
No, I haven't.
Do you have any desire to?
Yeah, I'd like to. It's not easy for me to try to make it up there, but yeah, someday, maybe when I'm retired, we plan on traveling. That would be one of the places I'd like to go.
It is quite moving.
Yeah.
Tony, if you could tell us, just in your general opinion, just give us a little opinion of what you thought. We hear a lot about it was a mistake to be in Vietnam, it was the worst war there was, it lasted the longest. Just give us a brief opinion of what you thought for yourself of the Vietnam War.
At the time, I thought it was the right thing. I really did. And I didn't mind going to do my part. But after I was there, as I mentioned, you know, looking at the vast majority of the people, I don't think it mattered to them who their government was. Because as I said, their life, it wasn't going to change, you know, no matter who was running their country. So in that regard, I'm thinking maybe it wasn't necessary. But that's, I guess history tells us.
It tells
us that. You know.
As you grow older, do you see yourself sitting down one day and telling your grandchildren about your experience in the war?
Probably not.
Why?
I don't know. I guess
the reason I ask is that I've sat here and observed you, and you're talking about this with pride, a great deal of pride.
I don't regret at all going, and I feel like it was something that, like I said, needed to be done at the time, and I wanted to do my part. After 9/11, and when we went into Afghanistan, I told Lisa, my wife, I said, I wish I could go. And I would have gone in a heartbeat if I was younger and was able.
A lot would.
But that's the way I am. You know, if you do something to us, we're going to rise up and we're going to pull together.
So when you're standing here in Blanco, Texas, let's say you're at a Friday night home football game, and you see that flag go up.
Oh yeah.
What hits you?
Pride, just America. I mean, I love this country, you know, and I'm proud that my daughters can grow up in freedom and liberty and make their own choices. That somebody in Washington or anywhere else is not telling them, okay, this is what you're going to do with your life. And it was a small part, but I feel like I had a part in ensuring that freedom for the next generations, you know.
And you know, Tony, you work here with the Blanco School District. Have you had the opportunity to see some of the children, the young men and women now that have graduated, that have gone off to these current conflicts that we're going through?
Well, just the other night at homecoming, Thomas Broyles and Lindsay Watt, and I can't remember the other person's name. There were 3 active military right now that came down and at halftime, and the band did a ceremony.
Wow.
Honoring them, and it was quite moving.
I'm sure it was.
The 2, Thomas and Lindsay, I know real well. The 3rd I didn't know so well, but you know, I appreciate whether it was Mr. Barton or whoever arranged that they thought of doing it.
That's right.
Because I think it was fantastic.
Well, Tony, I want to tell people that don't know a lot about you as far as what you do with the school district, that Blanco School is enriched to have someone of Tony's nature working with the school. He is much more than just the man who has all the keys. He's the man who truly influences children's lives as he's driving them home on the bus every day after school, and If you're an older person like myself and you're walking down the street one afternoon, don't be surprised if Tony Petri, the bus driver, stops and says, "Do you need a ride?" And he will give you a ride home. And to think that I'm giving a ride home once in a while by not only Tony Petri, a great person, but Tony Petri, a Vietnam veteran who we deeply appreciate what you did. We appreciate your brothers, and we're grateful to have you in this town and in our lives.
Thank you.
And more importantly, for doing this today, Tony.
Thank you.
This has been a part of our Blanco Oral History Project, and Tony is going to be a memory for us all to hold and cherish. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.